Ben Hancock, welcome to the Grateful Podcast. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So, I've been digging into your podcast for all the saints in preparation for this, and I just find it so amazing. It's so refreshing the way that the vibe on the podcast is like I cannot describe the vibe that you cultivate with your guests, and it just feels warm and welcoming. And we talked about faith a little bit before our conversation, but I I'm not religiously affiliated with any. I'm not. I don't have a name to what I believe, and so hearing your podcast and listening to your conversations, it was very refreshing because I didn't feel like there was any judgment coming from your end or the guest's end. It felt like a very open and welcoming environment for people of all beliefs. And I think that's one of the most important things that we can cultivate in this era and just for more understanding. And so I'm very impressed with that.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say. I had a bit of an experience when I was serving a Christian mission when I was younger, which maybe we'll get into a bit more later, where some Baptists came up and tried to pin me down on a point in the Bible. And what ensued was this great argument that I thought I won, but I kind of felt bad afterwards. And they probably did as
Mhm.
well, because, is contention the best way to be if you found some friends who also believe in God, never mind the differences? And my dad kind of told me off a bit when I told him about it and said it's much more important that if they're very stubborn in their faith, and you are too, like I think I'm in the right place, wouldn't it be better if you left them with increased faith in Jesus Christ, who they believe in and you believe in, and also you, rather than trying to tear them down? So I've always adopted that when with the podcast. I'm happy to interview anyone who has faith, and I believe I can learn from that faith and it can inspire my own. So that's where that comes from.
Right. One of the interesting things that it's not just in religion, but you do see it a lot is I think people oftentimes focus on what's different between two different belief systems rather than focusing on the very large amount of things that are similar, the shared beliefs and the core values and principles that are often the same.
Yeah,
It's very
you're
interesting.
absolutely right. Yeah, I mean, I'm a Latter-day Saint, so most mainstream Christians hate us. So we're like the least liked religion in America or something like that. I think I saw, and I don't know why. And it's just like there's so much more in common. And sometimes when I ask a guest to come on the show, I don't even tell them I'm a Latter-day Saint, and they figure it out after. And some of them are annoyed at that, and some of them are like, "Oh, that was refreshing," uh, maybe
Interesting.
a good experience.
So talk to me about what is a Latter-day Saint? What differentiates you from other religions and are your core beliefs?
I think the primary difference is our understanding of the nature of God. So we believe that the gospel of Jesus Christ and Christ's original church on the earth was restored, and for it to be restored, it kind of needed to be lost. And so we we don't adhere to the Nicene Creed, for example,
Hmm.
on their nature of God. And I'm sure many were well-meaning in creating those creeds. They wanted unity, but in the end, I think they are wrong. I think they get the nature of God wrong. And so, in about 200 years ago, Joseph Smith was visited, I believe, and according to his testimony, um, by God and Jesus Christ, and ushered in this restoration of the gospel. So that's a key difference. And then, obviously, a big part of our faith is the Book of Mormon and additional and ongoing scripture compared to just having the Bible. Um, and I mean, you can see what's happened with just the Bible is there's so much division and opinion. And for
Hmm.
me, the Book of Mormon and additional scripture clarifies and makes things really clear. And it's a powerful book for me. And then we also have, I mean, I could go on for ages. There's um, quite a lot of secondary differences in terms of
Yeah.
we have a prophet and apostles today. We believe on the earth, chosen by God to help us and guide us to the correct way. It's a complicated world, and so yeah. But fundamentally, we believe in Jesus Christ, that He is the living, resurrected Son of God. And like you say, there's a lot that we agree on, and then there's just those things that are different that mean that most Christians really don't like us.
Yeah. Well, what I found interesting is when I was reading some articles about just different religions, it was talking about how there's often misunderstanding because the media will hyperfixate on on the differences, no matter how small they are in the core beliefs of the religion itself. So, like what you said, your core belief is that Jesus Christ was resurrected, and then the and that's just a part of it. But after that, there are the small differences, the minute differences that in your overall faith seem to not be the core principle that you're focusing all of your energy on. But the journalists and the articles that are explaining to people what your faith is will hyperfixate on those things because they're the differences. They're the way that they can differentiate your faith from something that people already know. And so then people have this idea that you're more about this idea, this certain thing that deviates from their view than you actually are. And I've been curious about what the best way to actually represent a religion and educate people on religion is, because it seems like if you want to portray the differences, those are what are going to stick in people's heads, not the overarching similarities. There's this real paradox of religious education.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting point because I'm sure you don't need to be a Latter-day Saint to realize that the media has kind of, I don't know, picked us to have this kind of cultural zeitgeist moment the last few years with The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, Heretic, Under the Banner of Heaven. I mean, recently, American Primeval. There's tons of stuff in the media that kind of portray Latter-day Saints in ways that we wouldn't be very happy and we don't feel is accurate, and I actually kind of mocks us. I get a bunch of questions when people come to me like, Ben, are you going to have several wives? I'm like, no, why would I have several wives? I've got one wife, which is, the normal thing to do. But then you look at the last year, the church has just released their statistics where they talk about like the numbers of growth in membership of the church. And new converts to the church in 2024 were 308,000, which is the highest figure it's been since like this random year in the 90s when there was a really big boom. So it's like, on the one hand, it's embarrassing sometimes when Disney puts millions into a program that disparages your personal faith in an inaccurate way and in a bit of a hostile way. But then on the other hand, you're like, well, it's bringing attention and people are looking at that. I mean, look at the Book of Mormon musical. There've probably been quite a few conversions to the church after people have watched the Book of Mormon musical and then thought, oh, I'm kind of interested to learn a little bit more about what it actually is. And so, I don't know. I don't have the perfect answer. Maybe it's true the saying that any publicity is good publicity. Who knows?
Yeah. So this big boom that you're seeing in just people joining religion, I don't think it's just uh, in the Latter-day Saint faith. It seems
No.
to be across the board. And it's interesting because I was looking at some Pew Research data, um, and it shows a drop in Christianity in every Western country. And but this was in 2018. So it's interesting to see just in 2018 how people seem to be um, going away, moving in a direction away from these religious practices. And now 8 years, 7, 8 years later, people are coming back, and it's very interesting because I don't think many people would have predicted it. So I'm interested to get your perspective on why you think people are starting to resonate more with religious practice.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you mentioned 2018. Literally last week, a study came out that compared people going to church in 2018. This was in the UK. I don't know about the US.
Yeah.
but this was in. I was just trying to find it there. This was in 2018 to 2024, and young people are going to church fivefold the percentage compared to 2018 in 2024.
Wow.
Like a huge increase. Now, I don't. So, I mean, I've had some experiences with the Church of England, and I have a lot of friends who are great Anglicans, but they have struggled. The Methodists have struggled. The Methodists are down 40% or something crazy like that on church
Wow.
attendance. So there are these really old religions that sadly are just declining, and we see some terrible things going on in the Church of England with political decisions that they're making. It's crazy how they've succumbed to a lot of kind of extreme progressive views, so to speak. And I won't go into that, but you can probably decipher what I mean when I'm saying that. And that's been reflected. I think people are looking for a guiding star. I like the analogy of the star that led the wise men. The wise men go to the star and they know the star's there and they follow it. And today there are many people the last several years that seem to be looking for the star and they can see it, but they're like, no, there's got to be another star. They're trying to find the path, and it's like, but there is one there. As we try to get through this kind of complex world that we live in and navigate so many crazy things. So I think Gen Z are very impressive in the way that they're going about it. You can see a lot of sociological stats that show that they're looking for a step back, a pendulum swing back into tradition.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I wonder if part of the resurgence in Christianity is political and purely political, and how much of it is actually a real seeking for meaning. And I think probably in Gen Z it's a seeking for meaning, and I think in older generations, even millennials, I think it seems to be slightly more politically motivated, at least in my experience. Yeah.
100%. I agree with that. I think being a member of Gen Z and seeing all my peers, a lot of people are curious. There seems to be this idea fed to us on what is meaningful, and there's a lack of ideas being fed to us on what is meaningful. It depends on where you grow up, but I think people are curious and they want to understand why. And so people are looking everywhere. I know that meditation has been, since the 70s, been something that's really skyrocketed, but now it went from becoming something that was woo-woo to really implemented into culture. And so many successful people talk about their meditation and different spiritual practices as well. And this is happening alongside of the organized religion piece. It's really interesting to see. I have many friends that, and myself included, I'd say, define themselves as spiritual over religious. There are all these different nuances in the words we say. But yeah, I was curious to get your opinion on this idea of increased spirituality and where that differs and where we can draw the line between that and like organized religious practice.
Yeah, well, I'm a believer that they go hand in hand. That in our faith, there's a popular phrase that is home-centered, church-supported. So you have, and I think what you've had for a long time is Sunday Christians. You've heard that saying, right?
Yeah.
Sunday Christians, the people who go to church on a Sunday, and then have you watched Severance?
I haven't. I have so many people that are telling me I need to watch that show, but it's on the list.
My wife, but it's kind of, that premise of like your outie is your church person, and you go there on Sunday, and then you're back to your innie when you're at home, and really your faith is not penetrating the walls of your home and your daily routine. So I speak as someone in my own faith where all of the focus, all of the attention is your personal worship and your personal spirituality and your personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And I'm very grateful for that focus, because it means that, I went through a really big trial recently that was long and sustained, serious health challenge. And throughout it, if I didn't have that personal faith and that strength, and that I didn't. If I hadn't known how to receive the strength that the scriptures talk about, I don't know where I'd be. Maybe I'd be dead.
Hmm.
Maybe I would have killed myself. I don't know. And that sounds dramatic to say, maybe, but I was in a really bad place. The only thing that kept me really afloat was my wife, the impending arrival of my daughter, and my faith. I filled my daily life when I could with light, with inspiration, with sacred music, with sermons and talks from church leaders, and it really strengthened me. So there's the spiritual aspect.
Yeah.
But then my wife and I, well, I'll give two examples here. My wife and I, we've just had, I was telling you before, we've just had our first child. It's been crazy. And without asking, the members of our local congregation, and we've only been at this congregation for a year, we're still relatively new to the area, have come round the house. People, some of them we haven't spoken to that much and don't necessarily have a strong personal relationship with. We love them and we see them at church, but they've spent hours preparing meals for us and coming and giving that to us. For me, that's organized religion. That is organized religion, and that's saved our lives. Similar to that, I spoke to on my podcast recently, and who you should speak to is Diane Foley, the mother of
Yes, I
James Foley,
Yeah.
who was sadly publicly beheaded by ISIS. She's a devout Catholic. And she was the same. I asked her, did God abandon you? And she said, never, he never abandoned me. And whenever I went to church, my community supported me so much. So, I think when people think organized religion, they think, oh, all these stupid rules and people in funny hats and staffs walking down and, silly things like that. That's not what it's about, right? When I was really ill and I said to myself, why am I going to church? Because it's actually really hard for me to get out of the house and go to church. And my faith became authentic, and I really understood the true meaning of organized religion. And going to church really helped me, and my personal spirituality really helped me. And I think both aspects are needed. So I don't think we should discount organized religion. I think there's wisdom in it, and there's a reason it's been going on for so long.
That's a beautiful story, how so many people came out and helped you. I think that communal aspect is one part of religion that I crave, and I think is really hard to build in other areas. And it's easier to build something like that when you share such core values. And my parents always talk about it, because I did not grow up going to church, but my parents did. And my dad is now a pretty devout atheist, but he grew up going to church, and the one thing he always is never spoken negatively about is the community. And he talks about how it would be the spot where he saw his family, and everyone came together, and they would sing together, and they would that part of it. No matter what you believe, it's hard to ignore the magic in people coming together every week to do something and building a community around that and having each other's backs. I find that it's not found in many different areas of life. And the closest thing to it, and you're going to laugh, is sports teams, fandom of different sports teams. I'm an Eagles.
You're right.
Yeah, I'm a Eagles fan. We won the Super Bowl this year, Philadelphia Eagles, and you see someone in an Eagles shirt, and you go up and you high five them, and you say congratulations and all these things. But
see, I was slightly annoyed that the Eagles won because the Kansas City Chiefs, the head coach, is a Latter-day Saint. So
really,
I don't know anything
I did not
about
know that.
and he's been on a few. He's quite an outspoken Latter-day Saint, but he's I don't really know anything about American football, and I watched the Super Bowl once and didn't like it. I'm a proper soccer fan. Of the 45 minutes of free-flowing football each half, without all of these advert and commercial interruption. But I totally get what you mean, and we've lost that sense of community. And well, it's interesting. There was another study that came out that showed that the midlife crisis. Let me know if you've seen this before, but the midlife crisis is now redundant. It is not a thing. because
Really?
actually they've found that young people, like young 20s, late teens, like your age and my age essentially, their happiness levels were so much lower, and they increased consistently through middle age. So people
Huh.
were a lot happier. So now the crisis is happening much earlier. And so I think that's partly why, to your question before as well, why we're seeing young people in particular popping up at church and people on TikTok teaching people how to pray and all of this is because the midlife crisis isn't a thing anymore. It's the adolescent crisis. And, this is covered extensively on podcasts, the loneliness epidemic and all of this thing. So
Yeah.
you're totally right. That community is needed, whether it's a sports team, whether it's a church. Young people just need to get into some form of community, and they'll find there was another study. So I'm rambling here, but there was another
No,
study
you're
that showed
good.
that if you have a faith and you attend church weekly, or maybe it was regularly, and actually participate, in happiness terms, it's equivalent to, I can't remember if it was a 60 grand or $100,000 pay increase. So imagine how
Wow.
happy you'd feel if you suddenly got an $85,000 pay increase. That is the level of happiness that you will get increase from going to church or maybe finding a community.
That's incredible. So on those lines of like actively participating in a community like that, uh, one of my observations recently has been the difference between people that are actively members of a faith and people that label themselves as a member of a certain faith, but don't participate, don't seem to adhere to the belief systems of that particular faith. I'm interested to hear your opinion on those types of people, and how do you categorize someone as genuinely being a member of a certain faith? How do you categorize a Christian, or uh, you know what I mean?
Yeah, so on that same study that I recited, I love studies, you can tell. I
Me
love looking
too.
at
Yeah.
data. Us podcast hosts, we love data, don't we? They make for good discussion points. That same study on happiness showed that if you proclaim to be a part of a faith but don't live it, it's the same happiness levels as if you don't have a faith at all. But it
Interesting.
significantly increases, like I mentioned earlier, when you have a faith and you live it. So I always say you may as well live your faith or not proclaim it at all, because there's no point. The key is in the actual living of it, and within yourself if that's happening.
Hmm.
If you're doing your daily scripture study, if you're actually praying, if you're doing those things that you should be doing and they're really simple to do, and going to church. So there's something great about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the one I go to. I can't speak for other faiths. My impression when I visit is that it's more difficult to actively participate because you have a paid clergy. You have someone who's paid to lead the church, to lead the congregation, and to give the talks. Now, I think other people do give sermons in many congregations, but in our faith, we have no paid clergy on the leaders who do it full time and run the whole global church have an allowance, but it's quite a small allowance. But in terms of basically the whole church, there's no paid clergy. So if you become a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, pretty much as soon as you're baptized into it, you'll be given a responsibility, which I love. I think that's so important for instilling yourself into that community. I've just had a calling where I was running the social media for the church in the UK for the last year, and then I've just been let go of that responsibility. And my bishop, my local leader in the congregation, came to me 2 weeks ago and he said, "Don't worry though, I've got something for you. So we're going to have a meeting very soon once it's officially, you'll let go of that responsibility." We call it a calling. It's just a jargon term. And so I'm going to be called into the office soon, and I'm going to be asked if I can do it. And it will probably be something like, we have young men at church from like 12 to 18, and they have separate classes, and they have kind of youth clubs running on Tuesday. I anticipate maybe helping with that or something. But it's these. It could be teaching. It could be visiting people. It could be doing that. It could be organizing the notice board, like anything. It could be picking
Yeah.
music on a Sunday. But everyone has a responsibility, and I think that is so important. So I can't speak for other religions, but for us, if you're a member of our church, you get involved, you get stuck in, and you're benefited for it.
Yeah. That's really cool. It holds you accountable, and you also grow from it. You learn skills. I like that idea a lot. Um, I hope you're enjoying this episode of the Grateful Podcast. I'm interrupting to let you know that it would mean the world to me if you could share this episode with someone that you think would enjoy it, or leave a review down below so I can learn what I can do better and what I'm doing well with this podcast. It's a passion project, and I really want it to turn into something that helps people everywhere. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode. I think on the lines of what I just talked about with people that are outwardly a member of a faith and inwardly they aren't, it's a problem that a lot of non-religious people have with religion as a whole. As I said, I'm in a family that uh, there's a lot of different religious viewpoints, so I have a good amount of perspective. But the atheist viewpoint is one of the main arguments against religion is hypocrisy. People say certain things and then do the opposite of them. So many different examples of that over time. It's one of the most interesting things to me, and one of the things I like to dive into when I do think about a religion. I have to remember that members of a religion are only that, or they're only members of religion. And one of the arguments I have against that atheist argument is you're not going to say every Russian is a bad person just because you disagree with their government. But it's this whole balance, you know what I mean, of the hypocrisy in religion and the hypocrisy of a member, and differentiating between the two. There's a lot of differentiation that you have to do between a faith and its members.
Oh, absolutely. And, hypocrisy happens, it sucks. It happens everywhere. And, I just have to, we talked about the difference between spirituality and organized religion. In my own personal faith, whatever label I give myself, I have to focus on, Jesus taught me not to judge, or with the judgment that I judge people, I'll be judged as well. So, if I think someone's being hypocritical, I don't know what's going on in their life or whatever, but what I do have faith in is that God knows them, God knows the intimate details of their life, and will love them according to that, and rebuke them according to that, and, things will be made sure for them. It's not, unless I'm in a position where I have to get involved, it's not my place, and I try not to let that get in my head. If I'm annoyed at how someone else is living their faith, I have to look at myself, and it's like the Jesus taught about the mote in the beam, right? I can see the mote in your eye and forget the beam in my eye, and I think that's the antidote to hypocrisy, right? Is if you truly want to be, well, Jordan Peterson says, if individually we live well, collectively we flourish. So I need to focus on myself and make sure I'm not being hypocritical, and make sure my actions align with what I believe, and that I've got integrity, regardless of what other people are doing. And that's really, people leave their Christian faith for so many small reasons, like, if someone says a comment to them at church about their hair, they're like, "Oh, I'm never coming back to church again. He offended me about my hair." You know what I mean? And it's like, no, you've got to make sure your faith is anti-fragile, to use a productivity word, Nassim Nicholas Taleb there. Anti-fragile, that whatever happens, that my faith is going to be strong. And that's across the board, not just with regard to hypocrisy, but, if a tragic thing happens in your life, will your faith sustain you, or will you be bitter against God? And I've had both, right? I've had times when I've felt bitter to God and being like, why are you doing this to me? And then I've brought myself back and realized that the closer I am to Him, the better it is. I feel much more strengthened in His presence, and we can do all things through Him, through Christ, as Paul says. So I'm trying to get back to the original point, which which is
okay.
exactly as you said. There will be hypocrisy. I think you have to accept that we're all imperfect, so there will be that. But how will you stay strong despite that? Where is your faith in? Where do you put your faith in?
Do you think faith is something that we all have inside of us, and we just have to cultivate it?
Yeah, I think we're all born with it. I think we're all born with it, and you can go through experiences that knock your faith, right? Say a family that goes through a horrific thing, and they just get knocked down a few pegs. It takes real extraordinary faith to withstand that, and that faith has to be proactive, right? You need to make sure that you have strong faith to withstand those things, whether it's temptation, whether it's trial, whether it's just things that happen in life. So yeah, I think everyone has it, and I'm a believer that everyone can change as well. I served my Christian mission for the church in Malaysia and Singapore, which is a Muslim country with Sharia law, which is it's interesting in its own right and has its own challenges. There were people I met there that other people were convinced that they would never come back to church, that they were too angry, or they were too offensive, or they were too annoying, whatever. They were too atheist. Anyone can change, and it'll happen at the right time for them. In many times, some people are more open than others. But I had a guy where several years of missionaries had tried to bring this old guy, John, back to the church. This old Asian guy, and he had a very dry sense of humor, and he offended some previous missionaries who didn't understand his humor. Now, I was British. I was the only British person in that mission, and so when I came round to him, we just clicked, we connected, and thankfully, not due to me, but maybe because I was able to spend a bit more time with him without getting annoyed, he did come back to church. He always had that potential to come back, and God was working in him, and maybe God sent me there because I was someone that could love him, and he came back to church, and several years later, he's still very active, as we would describe, in the church, constantly getting involved. On the other hand, I worked with a Buddhist man who had a terrible car accident and flew, several feet over, and had a stroke in the hospital when he was recovering from that accident, and just so badly wounded by it. And his sister, who was a church member, had asked me to come and pray for them, and we taught him a bit about the church, and he one night was in a lot of pain, and he said, I'm going to try and pray like the missionaries taught me. And he said a prayer, and he had this amazing spiritual experience where he kind of, I don't know if it was a vision or a dream or something, but he saw Jesus Christ, and he realized after that God had always been there for him and throughout his life, and he had this newfound faith. And before that terrible crash, he was a stalwart Buddhist, and Buddhism is great as well. I'm not saying that, but my personal belief is he came to Christ when he never would have, out of kind of an unprecedented occurrence. So it happens differently for so many people, but God's working in all of us, and we all have the ability to change. God gave us the way to repent and change. So whatever someone's been through, or whatever someone's done, or if they've done terrible things in their life, they can work through that, and they can come back into the fold. And yeah, I believe everyone has a faith, and it takes some active work. I think as well, like sometimes I look at my screen time on my phone, and I'm like, blimey, that's a lot. Like, have I really spent 8 hours on my phone today? Like, that's most of the day. So I'm like, how much time do we actually give to developing things like that? And again, I think that's where Gen Z is very impressive, is they're they're sick of the reels and the brain rot and stuff, and they're saying, actually, I'm going to spend some time doing something meaningful. And it's in those moments where we find God and we find faith. It's not in the moments where we're being distracted, and we need to switch the television off sometimes, and switch off our phones, and let faith actually come through. It's there, but we don't always let it come through because we're so busy. So that's what I would say to that.
There's this interesting relationship where faith seems to help you get through hard times, but hard times seem to help build faith. It's an interesting, it's almost paradoxical, because you want to have some sort of faith to help you get through these tough times, like you were talking about earlier in your trials that you faced. Your faith was a huge part of you getting through that. But the only time that you can really build faith and put it to the test is in these difficult times. Again, I've talked about my faith a little bit with you, but it's not like I'm not affiliated anywhere. I just believe that I believe in something. And the hardest time in my life is when that started to develop, when I started to develop that, because it felt like I just knew that there was something helping me, something more than me. It's this idea of more than self that is omnipresent in every religion, whether there's the Buddhism non-self idea, or the idea in Hinduism that all these gods are actually a part of one God, or just in God in general in Christianity. It's so interesting how there's this idea of we are not just us, we're a part of something bigger, and that's this attractive idea that seems to draw most people into it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and well, I want to go to your point before about faith through hard times.
Yeah.
And I semi agree with you in that
Okay.
faith, it does require hard times to go through faith. We have a church leader called Henry Eyring. He's one of the foremost leaders in our church currently. He's like 99 or something, and he
Wow.
said through tears, praying, "Give me mountains to climb." Do we have the faith and the strength to ask God to give us a mountain to climb? Because he knows that his faith will be increased by that, and he'll grow closer to God through that trial. Now, I don't have the strength to say that. And we know that faith can move mountains, and sometimes faith will have to move mountains a wheelbarrow at a time over a long period, and that's just some people's cross to bear, right? But I also believe, and it's all throughout Scripture, that, well, Jesus Christ said if you have faith as a mustard seed, you can move mountains. And I think that speaks for itself in terms of your faith doesn't need to be strong to grow, and it doesn't necessarily need a hard trial to grow. There's a great chapter in the Book of Mormon where this prophet in ancient America, Alma, is preaching to these poor kind of peasants that were kicked out of the wealthy chapels because they were smelly and poor and homeless or whatever. And it's he speaks amazingly about it. I'm just one sec.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, let me read this to you. Now we will compare the word unto a seed. Now if ye give place that a seed may be planted in your heart, behold, if it be a true seed or a good seed, if you do not cast it out by your unbelief, that you will resist the Spirit of the Lord, behold, it will begin to swell within your breasts. And when you feel these swelling motions, you will begin to say within yourselves, it must needs be that this is a good seed, or that the word is good, for it beginneth to enlarge my soul, yea, it beginneth to enlighten my understanding, yea, it beginneth to be delicious to me. Now behold, would not this increase your faith? I say unto you, yea, nevertheless, it hath not grown up to a perfect knowledge. And he goes on, and it's basically saying that, faith doesn't need to be a perfect knowledge of stuff. But if you give place and time for your faith to grow, and just do something small that would increase your faith, you will see it grow, and you'll recognize it within you, And because it feels good when it does grow, you're like, well, it must be good then. And as you continue to do those things, you do it. So for me, it's like, if I know that God's given me a commandment to not do something or to do something, say he says he wants us to mourn with those that mourn, comfort those who stand in need of comfort. If someone in my local area or congregation or one of my friends is having a really hard time, and I pick up the phone and I minister to them, ministering being, I just wanted to let you know that I care about you. I hope you're doing well. Do you need anything? Something so simple. That'll make me feel good, and that'll make me increase my faith.
Yeah.
And, it's, if I pick up the scriptures, if I pick up the Bible this week, it's Holy Week when we're recording. If I study along with Holy Week and go along with the days of it was Palm Sunday yesterday. I read a bit about Palm Sunday. I watched a clip of one of our church leaders kind of studying Matthew 27 and discussing it. That increased my faith. I didn't go through a hard trial to do it. So, for people out there that are like, how do I actually increase my faith? It's just an experiment. You experiment and you see if it does increase your faith. And then you keep doing it and you find that you've got a really strong faith. So I can't remember what your next question was. That was kind of the previous one.
Yeah. I honestly forget as well. I should have written it down. But I think what you said right there was very beautiful, and I think that's really interesting perspective. And yeah, you don't need to go through hard times to grow as a person. That comes back to one of the main things that I talk about here on the Grateful podcast. It's this idea I have of duality, the duality of gratitude and ambition, where I think there's this misconception that you have to be miserable to want more. Like if you're either satisfied or you are going after something, and if you're going after something, that means that you're not satisfied with what you have. And this is one of the biggest almost diseases of our culture, where it's causing burnout and dissatisfaction. And I believe that you can be grateful for what you have right now while also trying to pursue more. Another thing that goes along with this is optimizing for fulfillment over external success and material success. What does success even mean if you still hate your life? It becomes, there's no real value to it. And from my experience, people of faith seem to feel more fulfilled and seem to gain more intrinsic value out of things. Does this ring true?
Oh, definitely. It's like people always say, "What is your why?" And it's become a bit of a cliche now saying that. It's kind of like I'm Tony Robbins on a stage telling you to find your why. But in reality, it's like if you can figure out, and I speak on this from a faith perspective, and secular people will speak about it from a secular perspective. But for me, if I think, why am I here? What am I doing on this earth? There's another verse by that same prophet in the Book of Mormon that says, this life is a time for men to prepare to meet God. It's a probationary period. And I think that probationary word is quite interesting, because when I think of probation, I think of a prisoner out of prison, and they're kind of proving that they can live in the world. And I don't think necessarily we were prisoners, but it's that principle of we're here to prepare to meet God. If that's true, if I actually believe that, then that changes my daily existence. You know what I mean? Like I've just had a daughter into the world. I'm happy. And of course, I'm going to still pursue a higher income to support my family and all of that. But in terms of a healthy perspective, my perspective is eternal, because I believe that this life is just a stepping stone in my eternal journey. And that brings me great joy to think, when I wake up in the morning, am I going to align my actions with my belief that I'm an eternal being and that I'm raising this beautiful eternal family that will, and I'm in this testing time where I can grow and learn and repent, make mistakes before I go back to be with my Father in heaven. as we say. And that, I mean, that's priceless. That knowledge for me is priceless. I had a sister who was stillborn, which obviously happens quite. It's not a really uncommon thing to happen. But because of my faith, it led me thinking like, will I see her again? And I asked that from a very young age. And so from a very young age, I found my why, I guess you would say. I found my faith in God's plan for us, and that I was here temporarily, and then I will die, and my life will continue, my existence will continue. That brought great clarity to my daily life. And so, yeah, I think as we find our why, as we find clarity in what we actually believe in, that really affects our daily life and what we prioritize. And I was so stressed out at work last year that it brought on a chronic illness in me. Like, I was doing too much and putting too much stress on it. When I stepped back and focused on what really matters, and, if you have a faith, then you can almost try and learn that from the scriptures and past things. Then it brings an eternal perspective that can help you overcome anything and go through anything with joy, not just enduring it, but thriving in it. So I believe that very strongly.
Yeah. Do you think that this is an interesting question? Do you think that your way is the best way? Do you think that the way that you found to optimize for joy, do you think that it's the best way to do it? Or are you pursuing other ways to ameliorate the way that you feel and the way that you live your life? Yeah, I get that that's a loaded question, but I'm interested to hear.
That's a big question. That is a really big question. Let me think. I've had. So let's go back to my illness. Right, it was a tough time,
Yeah.
hardest thing I've ever been through. There were times in that, as I said, where I felt bitter towards God and distanced myself from Him because I thought, how cruel is this? My wife's pregnant and I've got this terrible illness. Why can't you take it away from me? I had people praying for me and fasting for me continually. We do fasting in religion as a kind of addition to prayer, almost like a sacrifice. And yeah, nothing was changing. So I felt then and in the past, when I have not focused on my spiritual relationship to get me through stuff. And yeah, as you say, it's just not as joyful. It's not as happy. I in terms of my religion, of course, I'm biased in the sense that I believe that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is God's kingdom on earth. I believe it's the Church of Jesus Christ. I believe it's His church. I believe He's at the head of it. I believe the prophet is called of God to be in that position. So obviously I have bias with that. But in terms of the fundamental seeking Jesus as an answer to the complexity of life and bringing joy and growth and gratitude and ambition, all of that, I think there's nothing else as powerful as focusing on your relationship with Jesus Christ. I just don't. There is nothing else, I think, that can replace that. Partly because He suffered on the cross and in the Garden of Gethsemane everything that we could possibly go through so that He could comfort us in those times. The hardest thing you've been through, He's experienced harder than that, and He did it because He loves you, and so that when you're in that, you can look to Him as strength. And all the rest of it, Jesus Christ is the way. I think that is I think that's the best way. And I've kind of looked into other ways. Like I said, I've had without God. I've had with God. I've never been a Muslim. I've never been a Buddhist. I've never been a Sikh. But I've researched them and stuff. But in terms of my own experience, that's Jesus Christ is the way. Which is why I guess I try not to tear down people's faith when we have slight disagreements. I don't think God would want that. I think we should strengthen each other.
Right. I think that's really interesting. And it's remarkable how you can have, how I envy the confidence that you have that you know the way, and it makes for so many other people. I think that's attractive, and that makes what you believe more interesting to them. Like I know after this conversation, I'll go and check it out more because you are so confident. But then there's also in other religions, people are so confident as well, and then atheists are so confident. Um, Bringing it back to another thing, I love science, and so one of my favorite quotes, and I saw you used it in one of your videos, was by Andrew Huberman, where he said all the elements of science are entirely compatible with the idea of there being a God. And this was like, whoa to me, because forever I had the two pinned against each other. Um, and then I heard that quote, and then I read some Kurt Vonnegut. Have you read Kurt Vonnegut?
Kurt Vonnegut. I feel like the name is familiar, but I don't think I have.
He's written Slaughterhouse-Five, Cat's Cradle. He really,
Cat's Cradle.
yes, that's a book that I recommend you read. It's all about science and religion and their goals of finding why and finding meaning. But all of these things, I've had them pinned against each other, but I also think they're all going for the same thing. And I think it's so interesting how so many people have different mediums of finding what I believe to be eventually the same answer under everything.
It's that same gratitude and ambition though with science, right? If you actually, so I like to think that my faith is not a tribal faith. It's a genuine pursuit
Yeah.
of truth. And if you genuinely care about truth, then scientific discovery is exciting, right? Obviously, there's dogma and ideology within science that we can try and avoid. But if there's a genuine scientific discovery, it's fantastic, right? The president of the church, who, as I've mentioned a few times, is someone I hold up as a prophet. He was a leading heart researcher. He was one of the people instrumental in developing the heart-lung machine. He knows science like the back of his hand, and yet here he is, a man of faith, leading the church. I interviewed on my podcast Roz Pickard and Sygart, these leading AI researchers and biochemical, all of these people. And their faith, because of their faith, that's what inspires them to discover more truth and pursue what they're doing in science. So I completely agree with that. I mean, there's another verse in the Book of Mormon that says, all things denote. I like that he says denote and not connote, because connote is an inference, whereas denote it's obvious. All things denote there is a God, yea, even the earth, and all things that are upon the face of it, yea, in its motion, yea, and also all the planets which move in their regular form, do witness that there is a supreme creator, which is such a powerful verse of scripture. So, yeah, that thing with science, there's definitely, if you're genuinely curious about truth, then you don't really care if something contradicts with something you learned, because we're all learning, you know. God isn't here on earth, stood with us in this podcast, telling us, no, you're wrong, like this is stuff that we are learning, and, you know, when we pass on, I'm sure we'll have many interesting questions answered.
Yes.
Like, what really happened with JFK? No, I'm joking.
If God was on this podcast, I think it would get a lot more views than it's going to get. That'd be quite an interview.
Yeah, that would be. So, yeah, I saw this AI video of them having a podcast with Jesus, and it was I guess it was kind of sacrilegious, but it was also kind of funny as well.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Can you have a conversation with AI? Is that a thing yet? Are there, like, would you be able to join a call or have AI join a call and have some AI generated image with an AI generated voice?
Maybe. You know, there's some churches at the moment. I think it was a church in Germany that created an AI Jesus, where you go into the confessional box and there's a Jesus, and he's trained on the scriptures, and he's trained on that church's interpretation. And he's like, hello, dearly
That's
beloved.
crazy.
How can I help you today? May you be blessed. as you ask me a question, and then you ask a question, and it gives this AI response. But yeah, it's interesting seeing the AI rise in some churches. I don't necessarily think it's that wise to do.
Huh.
Yeah, but
Why?
I just think we are having an actual person and their experiences share stuff is much more profound than getting a language learning model to just recite stuff.
Yeah.
We believe in there's a spiritual being inside all of us, right? We are a spiritual being housed in flesh and bone on earth. There are those two parts to us, and so yeah. Again, this is getting quite spiritually deep, but I guess if you've seen someone pass away and you have that feeling that something leaves their body when they die, and you almost don't recognize the body left, and it's like, yeah, I just think there's there's a big difference between us and some AI trained sermon, perhaps. Obviously, there's uses for AI to increase and further the charitable work and things like that you can do, and obviously expand your reach. But in terms of actually preaching, and I'd much rather have an actual person speaking.
Do you think increases in science and technology and human capacity will help us understand faith at a higher level? Is there a correlation there?
I hope so. And I guess that's our decision to make.
Right.
There's a leader in our church called David Bednar, and he speaks really powerfully about wisely using technology for good. We can say, oh, technology's terrible, look at what phones have done to us, they've made us all addicted. But it's like, what if God gave us that technology and blessed us with it, and it has the potential to do much good, and we're just using it, like everything, we have temptation, right? And you can choose good and you can choose bad. What if we all chose good with technology? I don't think that'll be the case for now, that we'll all choose good for technology. But, imagine if we did. And it goes back to that Jordan Peterson quote. If individually we live well, we collectively flourish. If you and I use our technology very good, there's lots we can do to further that reach. Yeah.
The only real change comes from inside.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's like, from this conversation, I'm going to make sure that when I'm on my phone, again, it's like real life. I have decisions to make. Can I make decisions that will increase my faith, or will I make decisions that decrease my faith? I know it's not always as black and white as that, but it still stands.
Yeah, but that's a good model to think about it with. I think that, there's going to be vague gray areas, but you can often branch it into different things and think about, is this going to... the one I do is just, is this adding value to my life, or is it detracting value from my life?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. It can be as simple as that. All right. So one of my last questions I want to leave you with is, I want to talk about the future. We've talked about how recently, and my generation has been diving back into spirituality and faith. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how that's going to impact the future in politics and society. And obviously, you don't know the future. You're not the oracle, I don't think. But I'm always interested. I'm always interested to hear people's ideas and predictions.
Yeah, well, I'm seeing, in terms of faith and its influence, we're seeing, there's that kind of controversial sect of Christianity in politics and stuff, and kind of using Christianity as an excuse to bring forth policy. I don't know, sometimes that's good, sometimes it's not. It's very, I think that's a bigger, more serious conversation to have. But in terms of other stuff, everything I'm seeing is great. I almost think the millennial generation was kind of this outlier, I wonder, in history, that was just, for some reason, increasingly secular. And maybe we're just returning to a norm. Because the norm over history has been religious, right? I mean, that's how America was founded. Imagine if a country was founded today based off religious freedom, as a fundamental thing, you'd think, wow, that's kind of very religious of you to do. But that's the norm. So hopefully we're returning to a religious norm where we can re-find balance. Chris Williamson, who I work for, has said in a podcast that, which I thought was very wise of him to say, was that I wonder if our generation, are just the guinea pigs for, and we're kind of, just as our forebears had to take on the suffering of war, maybe we have to take the suffering of being on our smartphones and learning how to balance ourselves with devices, and for the next generation to then have a healthier balance with it. Maybe that's just our load to carry, and I'd rather have that than go to war, basically. But the price we pay for our future descendants may be the anxiety and loneliness and the things that come from figuring out how to use this new technology. So hopefully what we'll find in the future is a healthier relationship with technology. Maybe that we're not constantly tied to a smartphone or something like that, but that we use it for good, and that with the use of AI we have a bit more time, because we don't have to spend so much time with the kind of archaic tools that have now become archaic, that stuff can be done faster and all of that. Hopefully we'll give ourselves a bit more time and space to rediscover those values that are important, as Gen Z are already doing. So that's my hope, that we can get back to, I don't know, maybe the quickening of technology will paradoxically make us a bit more calmer, slower, and quieter and gentler in the way we go about our actual daily lives. If it did, that would be wonderful. But in terms of my personal faith, I obviously believe that Jesus Christ will come again someday, and that will be a wonderful, joyful occasion that I'm trying to prepare for every day by the kind of way I live my life.
Yeah. That quote by Chris, I really hope that's true. And I hope that technology will help us slow down. In my personal life, I've definitely seen the opposite, where the faster and more efficient technology is, the faster and efficient I feel like I have to become. So I overload myself with more and more work to try to become even more productive, because if I have these productivity tools, then that means I can increase my output by whatever times, instead of realizing that, oh, I could just keep the same output but have more time for other things. It's no, I need to increase my output overall. So that's a really interesting idea, that I could use that time that technology buys me back, and use that to build myself, not anything external. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Use that time that technology buys back, and that your effort buys you back, to maybe, I don't know, go and bake a loaf of bread and deliver it to an old lady. You know what I mean? I mean, imagine.
Beautiful.
That'd be such a nice world.
Or read more. Love reading. Yeah. Don't make enough time for that. Another thing is like meditation. Didn't really get to talk about it here, but I found that as one of my big spiritual practices. I like to meditate every day, and in the past few months I've been so incredibly busy that, of course, that's the thing that I say, oh well, I don't have time for that, instead of I don't have time for an extra 20 more minutes of work. I prioritize the output over the fulfillment, even though the fulfillment is what I like to optimize for. It's this very interesting paradox that I think we're running into in society, because as technology increases, everyone has that same idea of optimizing for success. So the thing I talked about with my output, everyone's output is 5xing, so I feel like I have to 5x my output. But it comes back to that Peterson quote. If we all individually thought about how we could use that extra time to cultivate more happiness and joy and fulfillment in our lives and faith, the world will be a better place.
And of course, as you discover faith and put some time into discovering faith, then you'll find maybe a different reason a different definition of what success is than the one that the world gives you. And you'll find a lot of contrast between what the world tells you and what answers you unlock when you prioritize your faith. And that's why, for me, I got married when I was 21, and now I have a child, and it's like, and I feel so blessed for that, and that's success to me, and I put that first, and that means that I can still be efficient and productive, and I can still try to push forward to succeed in my work, but I won't come to. I'm confident, based on what a lot of people, old people, have said, that when I come to the end of my life, I will be grateful that I focused on growing a family and really nourishing my faith than spending a lot more time and stress on work. I'm confident I'm confident that I'll be happy with the definition of success that I stuck to when I'm on my deathbed. And yeah, I want other people to have that same feeling as well. Yeah.
That's really important. And I get that sense from you. I get the sense that you're confident in what you value, and that you really appreciate. I get the sense that you really appreciate your life, and I think that's a contagious thing. So I really appreciate what you're putting out into the world, definitely making the world a better place and practicing what you preach.
Thank you. I think people like my wife would say I've still got a long way to go, but I think I'm on
We
the
all
right
do.
track, and that's what's
Yeah,
important. Yeah,
that's what's important. Cool. Ben, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Jack. You're a great interviewer, and I admire what you're doing. I think the podcast is great. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you. And everyone, make sure to go check out For All the Saints, another great podcast.
Thank you. Yes, do. Every Monday.
Every Monday. Thank you for listening to the Grateful Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean the world to me if you could either share this episode with friends and family who you think would enjoy it, or leave a review down below on what I can do to make this better for you and for other listeners. All that would just help me be able to spread my message of gratitude and living a purposeful life. I hope you have a great day. See you soon.